pollution, terrorism, refugees, famine, and more. Even at this very moment, numerous parts of the world are suffering in poverty due to various reasons. Korea had also suffered similar fates following the Korean War. At the time, aid from international communities became the driving force that helped Korea get back on its feet. After its amazingly rapid economic growth, Korea became a member of the DAC, or Development Assistance Committee, in 2009, becoming the only nation in the world to transform itself from an aid recipient to a donor country. At the center of Korea's miraculous transformation was ODA, or Official Development Assistance. ODA refers to official financing administered by a country or a public organization with the promotion of the economic development and welfare of a developing nation. At present, there are 23 member nations at DAC. This November, the 4th High-Level Forum on Aid Effectiveness, HLF4, will be held in Busan, Korea. This forum will serve as an opportunity to assess global progress in improving the quality of aid and find new directions to further ensure that aid helps reduce poverty and supports progress. On today's In Focus, we take an in-depth look at where Korea's ODA currently stands and its growth potentials.
ODA, Official Development Assistance, refers to an aiding or supporting another country at the government level. Interest and funds allocated for ODA are growing all around the world. Korea, which happens to be the only one nation in the world to have switched status from an aid recipient to a donor country, is also working to increase its part. Meanwhile, with the first high-level forum on aid effectiveness, HLF4, set to be held in Busan this November, more people are trying to learn more about ODA. Today's In Focus will shed a light on Korea's ODA policies and its future.
Kim Eun-mi, Dean and Professor, Graduate School of International Studies, Ewha Women's University. President, Korea Association of International Development and Cooperation. Director, Institute for Development and Human Security, Ewha Women's University. Chun Seung-hun, President, Korea Institute for Development Strategy. Adjunct Professor, Graduate School of International Studies, Yonsei University. Honorary Professor, Eurasian Economic Club of Scientists Association, Republic of Kazakhstan.
Welcome back. Today we are going to discuss about the Korea's ODA policies and its growth potential with two experts, the Dr. Chun Seung-hun and the Professor Kim Eun-mi. Well, thanks for being with us today. And the ODA is widely recognized as one of the main channels connecting the countries around the world, in particular between the rich and the poor. And in Korea, over the past years, in particular after launch of the incumbent government, the Korean government has put more priorities and more importance on the ODA policies. Regardless of this kind of efforts, I doubt how many people have understanding about the ODA. So I want to start today's discussion by defining what ODA is. Dr. Chung, would you please?
Well, in the global community, probably the most fundamental and core agenda is poverty reduction. Mm-hmm. In the world, 1 out of 5 are suffering from famine, malnutrition, and absolute poverty. ODA is government-to-government assistance for poverty reduction and development in the global community.
So, as far as I know, ODA stands for Official Development Assistance.
Right.
Yes. By the way, Professor Kim, when and who started the ODA? Would you please explain about history and the history of the ODA?
Government-to-government support and assistance has existed since the 18th, 19th century. But what we call ODA, or Official Development Assistance, began in earnest after Second World War. Mm-hmm. So it really began in 1945 And we can see the U.S.'s effort to rebuild Europe after the Second World War with the Marshall Plan, which lasted from 1948 to 52, is probably the most important example.
I see.
And also the UN has been at the forefront to help assist countries with development, security issues, and enduring peace. So all of these efforts began in earnest at the global level since the end of the Second World War.
I see. So it does not have not very long history. But I have one question. I think this can be the question which many people have regarding the ODA. For the recipient, for the less developed countries, certainly is very important as very beneficiary to them. But many people can have some question. What kind of benefits the donor countries could gain from ODA? In other words, why ODA is necessary?
Well, two reasons maybe account for ODA. One is, of course, humanitarian reasons for the benefits of the people suffering from absolute poverty. It comes from the passion of human nature. The other is the benefits of donors and the community as a whole. Well, poverty is a hotbed of conflict and terrors. Therefore, if poverty can be reduced, conflict may also be reduced, and public security of the community will be enhanced. At the same time, poverty reduction of developed countries enlarge markets and promotes progress of the global community. ODA is provided not only for the benefits of the recipients, but also for sustained peace and prosperity of the global community.
Certainly, that is a very important point we have to remember. But Professor Kim, well, as you explained before, after the World War II, ODA get on the right road, have been mainly activated. But could you tell us about the size, how much global volume of ODA is carried out by nations, and which countries are the largest donors among developed countries?
In 2008, we have official figures showing $128.7 billion around the world.
$7 billion?
128.
128, wow.
Yes, so it's a large volume. And the U.S. is the largest donor with over $30 billion. The U.K. follows with about $13.7 billion. France, Germany, and also Japan is quite a large donor. Japan used to be a very large donor up until the 1990s when its economy fell into trouble. But before then, Japan was a very large donor as well. So we see that many of the U.S. and Western European countries are large donors. There's another index that we use when we try to measure the volume of ODA. That is ODA versus gross national income.
GNI,
so at the,
yes.
GNI. So at the income level, so we want to get an average sense. U.S. is such a large economy. Of course, it will pay a lot for ODA, but we want to see per capita. What is the amount? If we use that indicator, the Northern European countries are doing very well. Norway provides over 1% of its national income toward ODA. Luxembourg follows, and Sweden also. Denmark and the Netherlands are very close to the 1 point mark, which is very significant for the size of their economies.
So most of the leading countries in ODA-related activities are European countries.
European countries,
I
yes.
see. Well, then, how about Korea? Korea, as far as I know, recently started the participating in ODA activities in the world. How about the Korea's ODA activities?
Well, Korea spends 0.1% of their income on ODA, while OECD DAC member countries spend 0.3% on the average.
Korea spent about 0.1%?
Yes.
I see.
The amount of Korea's ODA reached $1.17 billion, ranking 18th out of 23 OECD member countries. In understanding the low figure of ODA portion of income in Korea, we need to take into account that Korea has to spend similar amount of money to help North Korea. However, Korean governments, in accordance with international practices, is planning to increase its ODA from 0.1% to 0.25% until 2015, tripling of its ODA volume from $1 billion to $3 billion.
Professor Kim, as far as I know, you are the president of Korea Association of International Development Cooperation, so you maybe have more knowledge or information about the Korea's ODA policy. But recently, Korea joined the OECD DAC. What is OECD DAC? Could you explain about that?
Sure. DAC stands for Development Assistance Committee. It's one of the standalone committees at the OECD. It's the last committee the South Korean government joined. We were approved for membership in 2009, and we started activities in 2010. The main activities of DAC is DAC does not provide aid on its own. What it does is collects all information about ODA from all the member countries and sometimes non-member countries as well. We used to contribute our data before we became a member. So OECD is where DAC is where all the information about ODA gets gathered, and they make sure that the data is standardized so we can use.
I see.
And then another very important thing they do is they provide important guidelines for ODA. So I think we'll have a chance to talk about the high-level forum on aid effectiveness, but they provide a lot of information and guidelines and manuals of how to provide good aid. So they give us a lot of good practices and guidelines. Finally, they use peer review. They do peer reviews of member countries, and that's how they enforce or recommend countries follow the good practices. So these are some of the functions that the OECD DAC does.
By the way, DAC stands for
Development Assistance Committee.
I see. Well, so in 2009, Korea joined the OECD DAC. Then certainly the Korean government could achieve over the 2 years after she joined the OECD DAC. Could you elaborate more about the achievements the Korean government has achieved for the last 2 years?
Since 2009 and 2010, I think Korea has done a lot of important work domestically about focusing on better practices of ODA in Korea, but also leading the global discussions on ODA. So I think that's quite impressive. You know that the UN Secretary General is Ban Ki-moon. He is spearheading the efforts with Millennium Development Goals, and the Korean government has pledged to support that, those efforts. Second, last year we held a G20 summit meeting, and at the G20 summit meeting held in Seoul, development agenda was included, which also deals with how to supplement MDGs and help poverty-stricken countries overcome the detrimental effects of the financial crisis. And finally, in the OECD DAC, by hosting the high-level forum on aid effectiveness at Busan, we're also trying to bring in a new paradigm in the aid discussion from aid effectiveness to development effectiveness. So the Korean government, I think, has done a lot at the global level, focusing attention on the importance of poverty reduction and growth in the world. And within Korea, the Korean government and various aid implementing agencies have worked together very hard to develop some value-added programs that the Korean government and Korean aid implementation agencies can provide, such as the knowledge sharing program, KSP, New Village Movement, Semaul. They're also looking into maternal health programs and so on. So there are a lot of initiatives that the Korean government has been taking in the last 2 years.
So among the projects which Professor Kim explained, I personally have lots of interest in about KSP, knowledge sharing program, I think. And then Dr. John, you have much experiences in participating in KSP. Could you elaborate what the program is and what kind of achievements the Korean government has achieved in the, through the KSP program?
Well, the aim of KSP is knowledge sharing
Yes.
with the developing countries.
Mm-hmm.
Well, poverty gap, poverty means gap of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So Korea has accumulated sufficient knowledge of poverty reduction and economic development. So we are conducting many consulting services for African countries and many Central Asian countries as well. Well, my experience is that surprisingly, with the small consulting services, we had a chance to make a report to presidents. Among them are in Africa, Ghana, Mozambique, Democratic Republic of Congo, etc. They were very eager to hear Korea's experiences. And they are, the year before last year, I met His Excellency, Mr. President of Ghana. He told me that in 1960, per capita GDP of Ghana and Korea at the same level. But now there's a big gap. He told us that from now on, Ghana is ready to follow the trajectory of Korea. Please help us.
I see.
That is his remark.
I see. Well, certainly, for the last 2 years, Korean government could achieve a lot. But Professor Kim, as far as I know, in November, there will be a very big international event about the ODA. That is the HLF4, Higher Level Forum on the Aid Effectiveness 4. Is scheduled to be held in Busan this November. I think this is very meaningful for the Korean the policymakers and Korean organizations which are involved in the international aid project. What kind of significance it has?
The High Level Forum 4, this is going to be the final meeting. This is the highest level gathering of persons and governments interested in development cooperation. This follows the three previous meetings, first in Rome, then Paris, and Accra, Ghana. This is the final forum that deals with aid effectiveness. So we're trying to do a final wrap-up on how we have done in terms of following the Paris principles on ownership and alignment and harmonization and these other principles, and trying to assess how much we have helped developing countries overcome their poverty through the aid effectiveness paradigm. We hope also that this will be a time to move beyond aid effectiveness debate and move on to development effectiveness, trying to see then with all the aid that has been given, are we going to see or can we see real results in the ground? So we're trying to shift the debate from aid to development, so looking more at the outcome. Another very significant symbolism of the HLF4 is this is the first time that it's going to be held in Asia.
Oh, really?
Yes. And having chosen Korea is also, I think, quite significant. As Dr. Chan mentioned, Korea has overcome poverty in a very impressive way. We were one of the extreme poor countries. Our GNP per capita was $81 in 1961. So that puts us as one of the poorest countries in the world. And now we're one in the 12th or 13th largest economy. So we've made great strides. So it's very symbolic to hold a meeting here to show what can be done with aid and how development can occur even in the midst of extreme poverty and security tensions. So it provides hope for other developing countries that this can be done.
I see.
And finally, the HLF4 is very significant because this is the first time that civil society organizations are invited to the meeting.
Oh.
Yes, after the Ghana meeting, the civil society had a separate meeting outside of the HLF4 process, but this is the first time that the CSOs will be invited to the table, and I think that's very significant. So for several of these reasons, the HLF4 is, I think, going to be a milestone, and the declaration or whatever announcement they can agree upon, agreement they can agree at Busan will be a very important milestone event for discussions on global poverty reduction.
Yeah, I think it's really meaningful to hold the HLF4 in Korea, as Professor Kim and Dr. Chun mentioned. Korea used to be an aid recipient country, but right now we became a donor country. I think this is the first case, as far as I know.
Well, let me add some remarks
Yes, please.
on the significance of HLF4 Busan.
Yes, please.
Well, Korean people were enthusiastic about hosting 2018 Winter Olympic Games. And some newspapers reported that after turmoil of 2002 World Cup, after turmoil since 2002 World Cup, Korea could have a new national agenda. Yes, winter sports is a very important international event.
Yes.
But nobody can say discussions on core agenda of global community for sustained core prosperity of the world is not that important than the Winter Olympic Games. I think we should pay more interest to HLF4 at Busan.
Well, we will discuss about that issue later. Definitely, not many Koreans know about the official development assistance. But I think it's time of matter because the government is pushing, making every effort to let the people know about the ODA. And in fact, the Korean government, as we discussed before, has achieved a lot for the last 2 years after we joined the OECD DOC. Well, anyway, so I think that's you raised very important the points. So, Professor Kim, could you tell me about the challenges facing the Korean government in implementing or developing and implementing its ODA policies? What kind of problems do we have?
I think some of the broader challenges that Korea, as well as many other countries that provide official development assistance, is the public support, the citizen support for these programs, because ODA has no constituency inside the country usually. It's usually directed outwards toward helping the poor in other countries. So you may say, why do I have to care for these children in the other part of the world? But as we are living in the global world, and South Korea in particular, we made our money with exports, and we have gone everywhere with our exports and with our products and so on. So I think it's our responsibility to also care about these people as a global citizen. We make money in the world. We should also provide our support where it's needed. I think that's a very important sort of global civic role that we ought to play. So that's a broader sort of demand issue for how to get the public interested and to participate in these efforts. Secondly, within the Korean government, our ODA system is bifurcated. We have two very important ministries in charge of different parts of ODA. Minister of Strategy and Finance, primarily in charge of concessional loans, and Minister of Foreign Affairs in charge of grants.
Yes.
So OECD DAC, before we joined, recommended that we try to have more of a common focus, that we have a unilateral system, and so on. So the Korean government has made efforts to have the two ministries and implementing agencies, Exim Bank and KOICA, to work together. The ministry, the Prime Minister's office, has done a lot in terms of trying to integrate their work, but that continues to be a challenge. And finally, I think we have made pledge to the world that we will increase our ODA volume to about 3 times, to over $3 billion by 2015, and also increase our ODA to GNI to 0.25%. That's a commitment that we made to the world, and we should try our best to attain those goals.
Dr. Chun, maybe you may certainly have something to add. Could you?
Well, I think Korea has some unique experiences of poverty with one's own heart. It's different from understanding poverty with brain. So we have something to tell about poverty to developing countries. So to make the best, to utilize the best of our experience for the benefits of developing countries, I think the most important thing is how to commoditize our experiences and how to deliver our experiences for them. For that matter, I think we need foster international development consultants, which make effective delivery for the delivery of the ODA services for the benefits of developing countries.
I see. Well, so far we have discussed our Korea's ODA policies and its future with two experts, Dr. Chun Sung-hoon and Professor Kim Eun-mi. Well, thank you for being with us today. And then, well, from the discussion, we found it out that the ODA is very important, not only for less developed countries, but also the developed countries. And the Korean government has achieved a lot in the ODA policies over the past several years, but still a long way to go until we became one of the leading players in the international community. We have to make more efforts. Well, this is all for today, and I am Shin Sang-hyuk for In Focus, and see you next time.